All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott, IT instructor at Rankin Technical College in the Application and Website Development Program. What I've been doing is going through quickly the information from chapters 13, 15, and 16 from our Muroc C# 7th edition textbook. The reason that I'm doing this is the next test that we will be taking for this class, which will be on Monday, March 14th, I believe, it's supposed to be on chapters 13, 14, 15, and 16. Our last test was on 12. Well, this next test, you'll have to still understand 12, but it's basically on chapter 14. All right, and chapter 14 is on inheritance. We've already gone through that. We're going to go through a fairly extensive inheritance example today and another one tomorrow. So I'm changing around what we're doing in class. Today I'm going to go through the inheritance example and the inheritance example that's on that letters program. It'll probably take 1 to 2 hours. I'm going to go nice and slow. I'm even going to send you the interface, even though I asked you to build it yourselves. And we're going to go over it. We're going to build all the, write all the code, etc. All right, then tomorrow we'll do the same thing with that photo class. Then Thursday we're going to go through a fairly extensive example which is designed to tie everything together that we've been talking about throughout this whole unit. It'll be an employee class, and we'll put a whole bunch of stuff in there. All right, Friday will be the pretest, and next Monday will be your actual test. Okay, so with that said, let's quickly go through Chapter 16, how to organize, document, and test your classes. All right, the first thing to mention, as they say there, is how to add XML documentation to your classes. Let's quickly, and I mean quickly, let's look at that. All right, this is the program that we're going to work on in class today, so I'm not even going to mention it except for one thing. And that is, you all know, if I go down to the bottom here, you know how to put in a comment. You know that if I come down here and I say, hello, that's a comment. It's skipped by the compiler. In other words, when the program's compiled, it throws away comments. But you may or may not have known that if I put in 3 slashes, you may or may not be able to tell, but if you look at it here, I thought it was like this. Maybe I'm wrong. I thought it was 3 slashes, but we'll find out in a second. All right. It's an XML comment. XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. Now, you probably have even heard me give this shtick before, so let's make it short and sweet. All right. And that is, probably in around the 1990s, late 90s or so, somewhere in there, someone came up with a bright idea and said, hey, the hypertext markup language, HTML, is old, it's outdated, it only has a certain number of tags. Let's come up with something new. So they came up with this new language called XML, the Extensible Markup Language. And the idea was XML was supposed to replace HTML. The biggest difference between XML and HTML is with XML, you can make your own tags. But there were a lot of problems with that. There were a lot of variants that came up of different kinds of XML. There are still probably at least a couple hundred different types of XML. There's music XML. There's chem XML for chemistry types of stuff. There's math XML, etc. There's a lot of stuff. So we'll talk about XML documentation. Then we'll talk about how to create and use a class library. After a while, if you build enough routines that you start to think, I could write this in a really generic way and I might be able to use it in other programs, then you're starting to think about what a library is about. Talking about unit testing to test your classes and your class libraries. Describe 2 ways you can code 2 or more classes in a single file. Describe the benefits of creating and using a class library. Describe the use of namespaces. Describe the use of partial classes. Describe the advantages of unit testing. Describe the AAA pattern that's commonly used with unit testing. So let's get into it. As they say here, this is a file with two classes coded one after another. Now, what's the advantage of coding two class files like this in the same file? The advantage is twofold. It's brevity, because typically you're only one file as opposed to two, and it can result in less code. All right. The disadvantage is you don't have this segregation of classes. You have integrated them. Even though they're separate, they're now in the same file. Now, quite often what people do is they take their class with main, and if they only have a small class that's going to be working with it, they'll put that right below it. Right? There might even be an example of that in here. All right. You can also have a class within a class. All right. Now, one of the things that differentiates the C# programming language from a language like Java, in Java, you can't have two public classes in the same file. And in Java, you can have a class within a class like this, but the inner class, or nested class, as they're also known, must be private. All right? So as it says, here is a customer class that's split into two different files. So why would you do this? Why would you split a class into two files? Kind of the opposite of what we talked about before. If you've got a single class that's getting too big, you might want to split it into two files. Or if you've got a class that's basically doing two different things, each of which is fairly complex, you might want to split it into two files. Notice they both have the same name, and notice they both say partial. They're both partial files. All right? You can do the same thing with a form. So you can say partial class form 1. That's what we've been doing. In fact, I'll make you a bet that if we take a look at what we have here and we go up to the top of the program, it says partial class, the name of our form, :form. Partial literally means that it's possible that rather than having a class be in one file, it can be in multiple files. Just because it says partial doesn't mean it's going to be more than one file, but because it says partial, it means it can be in more than one file. All right? Okay. All right. Namespaces. Now, we've talked a little bit about namespaces before. All right. It says code that declares a namespace. Well, what this says basically is that, in this case at least, this class here lives inside of this namespace. All right. You can have a namespace within a namespace. Notice we've got a validation namespace inside of a Muroc namespace. All right. What's the advantage of doing that? Again, sometimes when you are organizing classes and these classes get to where they get unbelievably large in size, by setting up namespaces, you're able to do some partitioning off, for lack of better words. All right. So if we had this Muroc namespace and something that we put inside of validation, and we wanted to use this namespace inside of another class, we could say using Muroc dot validation, and that would give us access to everything that's in here. All right. So it was 3 forward slashes for an XML comment. All right. And again, the reason that you can put XML comments into a program, the reason you may want to put XML comments into a program is shown right here. Notice they've got in here summary tags. Now, probably not the greatest example right here, but the idea is that you can provide extra documentation. All right, and I believe that unlike, I could be wrong on this, but I don't think I am. I believe that unlike regular comments that get thrown away, I believe that XML comments get compiled along with the rest of your code. All right, so they become a sense of more internal documentation. All right. So these are the basic tags that you could end up using in here. Summary tags, as it says, provides a general description of a class or a property or a method or some other element. Value to describe the property values. Returns to show return types. All right, and params for parameters. Now, the reason that this becomes important, just so you know, I'm going to show you an example, and it's not going to be a C# example. All right, what I'm going to do, and I'm jumping way ahead, so I'm jumping ahead a year right now, but if I go out to java.sun.com, it's going to push me off to an Oracle site, which is fine. And over here, if I go out and look for, I'm going to do a search for API. And it's got Java APIs, okay? It doesn't matter which one I pick. I'm just going to pick an API here. All right, so let's see. Java, let's do it like this. Latest Java API. Okay. All right. So I'm trying to show you why you might want to use an API. So if I come down here, you can see all this stuff. Let's say I wanted to learn about Java SQL. Well, I can highlight it. I can see what it says, but if I click on there, what it's going to show me, among other things, are description of the different things that are available to it. In fact, I want to show you a good example, and that's not a good one. So let's see. All right, so here, this is the Java API. So if I want to know more about an exception, so let's grab bad string operation exception, and if I click on it like this, what it's starting to show me in here, some of the material that's in here was created using the same kind of XML comments, but in Java they're called Java docs. I'm not doing a great job of this. Let's see. C#, XML comment example, I guess. This is from Microsoft Docs. There you go. So it's showing the different stuff in here. So summary, every class and member should have a one-sentence summary describing its purpose. Now, did we need to do this with the stuff that we've been working on? Of course not. Could we add this stuff in here? Of course we can. All right. Maybe we'll add some of this, and maybe we'll put in some of these different things in here when we go through our example today. In fact, let me grab all this. All right, I'm just going to use those, and I'm going to print this out. All right, sorry for that little aside there. So let's finish this up. So XML comments are used to provide further internal documentation for a program. These are ones that you can use. In Java, they're called Java doc comments. All right. A screen tip for documentation for a method. Well, you probably have at least somewhat noticed this stuff already. All right. So the reason that you might want to add things like parameters, etc., is you can go in there. You could do this with regular comments. All right. But these are providing more internal documentation, and like I said, I'm fairly certain that these get compiled along with your regular code. This is providing further program documentation. Okay? And it says with the screen tips, it'll basically can show you the stuff that's available in there. You've seen this kind of stuff before. All right. So they create this validator class that has this stuff. So this was something you'd create. And by adding that stuff, when you put it in there, it'll show you the different things. Hey, does this look familiar? Is present, is within range, is in 32, is decimal. These are all the kinds of things we've used before. All right. Okay. Now, there is an advantage, as I've already mentioned, to going in and creating a class library. What is the advantage of doing that? The advantage of doing that is once you create a class library, you can take that library and bring that, that has one or more classes in it, and bring it into any project that could utilize that library. Library is a great name because when you think about it, why do they set up a library? So people can share books, right? We're talking about the same type of an idea here, but we're talking about being able to share code. All right. We're going to go through all of this stuff, like I said, on Thursday. When you go and create that, maybe you remember this, but we did go in an earlier example this semester. One of the things that I did was I created a special class where we went in and we for our programs, we were able to share that exit routine. All right, we're going to look at stuff like that again on Thursday. All right, the last thing that's discussed in this chapter then is unit testing. What you want to make sure, let's pretend for a minute that I work for a major gym outlet in the Missouri area, and the work that we do with our customers, etc., we're using C#, and we've got programs to register people. We've got people online where we can check them, and people haven't been coming for a while, etc. And we decide to add a new feature to that code. Well, if we add a new feature to that code, that becomes a new unit of code that we're putting in. All right? And we want to make sure that not only does that code work correctly, but that code can be acclimated or work with existing code. And that's this whole unit testing process that they're talking about. All right? So we want to be able to test methods that call methods of other classes, test methods in our new class that make sure it works correctly, and debug things that don't work until they do. An advantage of taking and breaking this up is basically when you unit test and you test pieces of your code, you find problems earlier in the development cycle. And yeah, it says that you find them earlier. That would be possible, earlier than possible if you tested them manually. The other thing is, the earlier in the process that you find these errors, the cheaper it is to fix them. The later in the process you find the errors, the more expensive it is to fix them. You can run unit tests each time you make a change to quickly detect whether or not you've broken what's there. You can develop and test an application more quickly because you don't have to run it and retest it every time you change the code. So you come up with unit tests to see how whatever you're working with, how it works with the entire application by breaking that application down into different units. As it says too, it makes the debugging easier because when a test fails, you only need to debug the most recent code changes. All right. So they give a unit test example in here, and they show how to create it and some of the things that you can test for. We're not doing that. And again, I hope at least you don't feel cheated. There's no way in heck to go over a textbook, and I've got my book in front of me here, that has, with the index and the like, upwards of 800 pages, 788 pages. It's not really possible to go into every facet in this book in detail. All right, so that's pretty much it. So again, what I'm going to do today Tuesday, the 8th of March, is I'm going to go over this particular example, this letters example. Create a GUI application for a letter delivery service. Letters cost 50 cents to send, etc. And we're going to go through that. I'm going to send you this interface. For the code, all I'm going to send you is basically these comments that are in here. We're going to look as a class at this. All right. And we're going to write a letter class. Then we're going to write a certified letter class. Then we will put them together and make them work so that in this letter delivery app, we're able to put in a recipient, a sent date, and a tracking number, and click send. When we click send, we've got a list of what we just put in. So the recipient will be put here, the sent date will be put here, and the tracking number is not shown. All right? Or is it shown? Maybe it is. Maybe that's it right there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't remember. But we'll look at it as a class. Then tomorrow we'll go over this one, which is a much more extensive example. If you can understand what's going on with this one, you really shouldn't have a lot of problems with the test, because the test is more along the lines of this one. I'm not going to say it's exactly the same as this. Of course it's not. But I'd say it's more similar to this than it is to this one. All right? Could I be wrong? I guess so. Maybe it is more similar to this one. All right? So we'll talk about that in class today. See you then.